Okay, so in the last section, we saw how we integrate JIRA with GitHub. We created a new story that we can pick for development. We created a new branch after um, the story was created, and now we are ready to actually work on the change. So I'm already on the branch that was created. Before we move forward, let's look at one of the tools that we are going to use, which is Ngrok. And what it helps us do is make the local instance of Jenkins available as a way to integrate with GitHub. So what it is it basically creates a tunnel for your local instance that is running, and you can get a new URL, which is a URL that you're going to use for forwarding your request from GitHub. And that way you can integrate your local instance of Jenkins talking to GitHub so that anytime there is a commit, that it's going to make a callback to your local instance of Jenkins using the URL, which is a tunnel, and it's going to do the build process. So we've talked about this in the past where it is a bit difficult to set that up, but let's go ahead and actually make sure that we can use the tool. I've already downloaded it. It's available in my runtime library here. I'm just going to do uh, initiate the ngrok and ngrok http and 8090, which is where my Jenkins instance is running. So at this point, I have my forwarding URL, which is what I'm going to use to register within my GitHub configuration. So let me copy that, head over to my GitHub instance, and under the settings for the user, under integration and services, I'm going to add a service. So if you look for Jenkins, you should find it, which is the same thing that you're going to use as part of your installation. But I already had the Jenkins, so I'm just going to use the Jenkins hook URL. Make sure that you have the GitHub webhook, and this is what you need because that's the default callback that is going to call in whenever there's a new commit happening in Git. So I updated the service, and let's test the service to make sure that it can make the successful callback, and it says okay, the test payload is on its way. So if you head back over to your terminal, you should see a request coming in, which is the post from GitHub webhook, and it's got a 200 response, which is it is able to talk to it. So with this, we have Ngrok set up. Now before we make any changes, I think there are a few other things that we'll have to tweak within Jenkins, and we're going to look at it in a bit. So let's double check a couple of things. Actually, we already had the code change. Let's go ahead and finish that. So I have this open within Spring SDS, but if you had you have been using Atom, that's fine, or any editor that you're familiar with. So the change that was requested by the users was to change from Udemy to Devops, and it's a fairly simple change. We're not going to get into the deep down coding, but all we are trying to do at this point is try to look at the entire life cycle from a point of a commit to a job that's kicked off and all of that. So I made the change, I committed it. Let me run a clean package, make sure everything is still building fine before actually I commit this change. So that's good to go. Um, let's make sure that we go ahead and commit this change. So git commit and give it a commit changes for the header, or you can say change for dev1, which is the story number, right? So at this point, before I go ahead and do the push, let's go ahead and head over to our Jenkins instance. and my Jenkins instance is running. I already had this configured earlier, but you can hit on configure and make sure within the build triggers you have the GitHub hook trigger for git SCM polling is checked. So this is the one that's going to listen for any changes. Now at this point, you notice that the first job already failed, right? So this was already listening for any changes on the GitHub the first time. We didn't have our Tomcat running, and that's the reason the deploy failed, right? So the build failed right there. So before we go ahead and push the change, let's make sure we have the Tomcat running. Let me check my alias for Tomcat. So I think it's Tomcat dev start, which is the correct alias. So you can do some of these alias for yourself to give you quick shortcuts to type the command. So my Tomcat is up and running at this point, and let's head back. And I think this is not going to still kick off until we push the change, right? So let's go ahead and make sure we push our change, push the feature branch that we made the change. I'm gonna head over there, and since this is a new branch, I'm just gonna do git push origin, the name of the branch, and I'm going to do the push. So since my configuration is only listening on the develop branch, right? It's not listening on all the feature branch. You wouldn't see a job triggered automatically. Some of the commercial tools that's available where, for example, Cloudbase or Bamboo, where every push is actually going to kick off a build, and you can customize that. But in this particular scenario, we have not done that. Um, so instead of listening for develop, I can listen for everything, and that's a configuration change within the job itself. So let's go ahead and I push the change. I'm going to head over to my Devops and go into my feature. I'm going to create a pull request, right? So changes for the story, and I'm just going to add changes for dev one, create the pull request. It's checking for whether it's able to merge it automatically. So I'm merging from my feature to the develop branch. I have confirmed the merge, right? So there are a few things that will happen at this point. One is it's going to kick off the build, and there you see we have two builds running because both of them were listening on DevOps, or I should say develop branch, right? So both of them are running. But in addition to that, it's also going to send a hook or send a notification to my JIRA story, right? So if we look at the JIRA, and let's double check. Okay, so it's got the post from the GitHub, and both of the jobs are building. But in addition to this, what I should be able to see is within the JIRA any changes that happen on that particular story. So that's how you have now complete integration. So if I head over to JIRA and I click on my story, and you'll see that I have under the development um, that it's already got my branch that was used. There were two commits, right? And there was one pull request. So now Jira is integrated with GitHub, and GitHub pushed notification to Jenkins, and Jenkins is doing the build. And let's look at where it is. It's within the deployment, since we had two jobs that are probably competing for the resources for deploy and artifacts. Um, that's where it's probably slowing it down a bit. But typically you'll just have, so it finished the deploy, it went through the smoke test, and it's actually pushing it to Artifactory at this point, right? So we have gone through the entire cycle from creating a story in Jira and then pushing it all the way. And at this point, the story should have already been in progress. I cannot move it to pending testing because I don't think so I added a transition. But let's assume that it's good from a testing perspective, and I move it to done. So I've moved it to done. The story is complete, and it shows the commits, two unique commits, right? One on the branch, one on the merge request. And you can navigate to that and see what was changed and stuff like that. And this gives you a complete traceability. So we've looked at that. We've looked at the Ngrok or view, the webhook from GitHub, the code changes per the story, and um, all of the integrations through JIRA, Confluence, GitHub, and the story itself, right? So you can see the entire history on it. So it basically gives you an entire traceability per story, right? And you can also kind of publish the changes to Confluence, and we can take a look at that real quick. So head over back into my JIRA, and I'm going to say release. Since I didn't assign it to a original release that we created, let's go ahead and look at the releases. So it's within the April release. I didn't assign the story as part of the April release, but I can go ahead and go back to my board, and let's say, well, I was trying to see if I can assign it here, but I don't see that. But let's not worry about that and say release a new version. I'm just gonna call it a beta version. I'm gonna say release, right? So I have released the issue to production. You can go into reporting, but let's go through releases real quick and select the released filter there, and you have the beta version that it's been released. You can look at the release notes. You can copy and paste some of this release notes, and it will have a reference back to JIRA. But there is a quicker way to do that, as if you head over to Confluence, which is Devops Spaces, open it in a new tab, and under Pages, you can say, let me go ahead and create a new page, and it's a JIRA report, and it's a change log. You can select the project, give it the version, so beta version, and say create, and publish, right? So at this point, you have your release notes for a particular release, and you have all the stories that went into that particular release. You can provide this to your um, um, support personnel or to your stakeholders um, for any kind of changes that went into a particular release. So we've gone through all of it, and I hope this was additional bonus section that will be helpful with your continuous learning with DevOps, especially around the CI/CD um, namespace. And I hope this information will be helpful with your learning for this specific course. And